So I started looking in May and actually in April by myself, and I joined the program on July 4th. So probably about 3 months before I joined your team.
How many interviews did you go on before then?
Maybe 2. And that's when I realized very quickly I need some help. I hadn't interviewed in over 20 years, so I think that was that big aha. Things certainly have changed. Your program has really set me up for success.
That's typically our next question. Say, hey, at what point do you know you need help? And you were like, hey, it had been 90 days and I went on 2 interviews. And I'm like, I don't think this is the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, so I went on 13 interviews, and you're correct. So right when I had joined your program, it was right around July 4th. It was that very same weekend that I had a contact that actually put me in touch with Subway. So the timing couldn't have been any better. I had a lead working. They got me in touch, and then the timing was perfect because through your program, you did coach me through the entire process. Here's what you need to be asking for. Here's how we prepare. Everything from the very first interview. And then as I started meeting with the HR folks at Subway and the leadership and whatnot, so every interview was slightly different. And also the feedback I was getting from the interview, from the recruiters and from HR, not just relaying that back to you. You said, okay, well, here's what we need to change or tweak for the next interview. That was really key for me. Every interview was slightly different, and so it's not a cookie cutter approach by any way, shape, or form. And I went through 13 interviews, and the last 3 were basically with the same individuals.
They had to fly you out, and they're like, let's
Right.
meet you in person. I remember during this time too, we never really talk about follow-up a lot on these videos, but man, it was like they're supposed to get back this day, call, text, and then you left. I remember when you left and you're like, hey, 3 people went up there flew to meet with the CTO and CIO of Subway. And then they're like, oh, we're gonna, let someone know in a week. And then like 2 weeks have gone by and you're like,
Right.
oh man, kind of just sweating. That's what happens in these long ones. And I do remember too, before we go into the next question, is when you first got that offer in, and then they were like, we kind of shot back saying, hey, can we just get a little bit more, right? And then they were like, no. And then they were like, yes.
Right.
It's funny how all that pans out. They're like, we can't do any more on the bonus or the base, but what can you do?
Yeah, it was a little, towards the end there, it was a little frustrating. I'm like, okay, well, I just want this to be over with.
Yeah.
But you're right, though. We went through the negotiations and everything else, and basically they said no to all our requests or on a counter, which I'm like, okay. But at the end of the day, Tim, you flat out asked me, goes, is this a fair deal? And at the end of the day, it was a fair deal. It's always nice to ask a little bit more. So I really had to sleep on it. I'm like, yeah, it is a fair deal. But then when I went back and asked them again, hey, what about the relocation piece and what can you do there? And there was a misunderstanding between the recruiter and what HR, what they had told HR. When I put it to them that way, I'm like, okay, well, I can stay with friends and family for a short period of time, but not for like a year or 2 years. And that's when I think that changed their mind. So they went back and came back. So, hey, we'll up it and we'll give you this relocation assistance.
Always ask one more time, always ask one more time. Awesome.
I'd say it's a combination of things. One, first and foremost, it's really getting the right mindset. And I've heard this before, but I didn't really realize it until I actually was going through the program, especially through these interviews. When I was on interview 8 or 9, I'm like, okay, well, how many more interviews is this going to take? Now, this is just mentally draining. I've heard some other team members in this program said you have to get in the right mindset. And I absolutely agree with that, is saying if you really want it, you gotta be in it 100%. It's not a part-time gig. It really is another job, looking for a job. And just clearing out, okay, well, I haven't heard back. Is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing? Just, getting all those negative thoughts out of your mind and just think positive. I think it's going to happen. And what I noticed with me in particular is, okay, well, I'm working towards this. Yeah, things are looking pretty good. The process became that much more easier. Gained more confidence because when I get to the next interview, it's like, okay, well, they weeded out some people and I made it to the next round. That kind of boosted my confidence a little bit more. And then the other thing is your styles are just totally different. So for me, I kind of leverage both. I'm like, okay, well, let me see what Tim's saying this time and try that. And I worked great, was comfortable with. And for me, 2 totally different styles, and I could actually pick and choose, based on what I felt comfortable with and going into interviews. So I think that was key too, to having that option.
Yeah, and I know when you talk about that mindset piece too, everyone knows they have to be positive, right? But you can't just say, I need to be positive. You have to be surrounded. Your environment has to be positive. There's so many things when people say, hey, you need to just think positive, sometimes it's really hard to do that when you're under stress and stuff. So unless you're a part of a community and unless you have like tactics and strategies to really work on that, it makes it very difficult.
I was freaking out about the interview early on, but as you went through this process, it's not really an interview, it's more of a conversation, and that's what I ended up having. So rather than them asking me all the questions, towards the end there, I was asking them a lot of the questions, and it turns out they ended up doing a lot of the talking, especially towards the end, which made it that much easier.
We always talk about, just being the consultant on every interview, whether it's the first or down the line when you're meeting with the executive team, how just important that is. Sanjeev, our last question is, what advice would you have someone who's considering working with us? Like, a lot of people watch these videos, so we always kind of put it in your lane and say, if someone was here right now, it's been 90 days, hypothetically, they've been on 2 interviews, what advice would you have for them?
I'd say believe in the process. The process really does work, and I'm one of many examples of that. As long as you're willing to put in the work and the effort, things will happen. Even if you get rejected from interview, which happened to me, it's I use it as a learning experience. It's like, okay, well, at the end of the day, it's not always about the fit. It's also about making that connection too. And sometimes you've talked about making that connection. You could be the best qualified person for that position, but if you don't make that connection, but using that as a learning opportunity for the next interview is what I really learned. So my 2 cents are to believe in the process and just put forth the effort and the work, and things will happen.
Thanks so much for sharing that. So I know when we talk about, showing up with positivity, opportunity, being the consultant on the interviews, but also be aware that you should be getting no's during this process, because it'd be kind of weird if you went on every job interview and everyone told you yes. If that happens, you're probably targeting too low. And you have to be aware that you have to go through the no's to get to the yes. That's just a part of being successful. So, hey, thanks so much. And we wish you the best of luck, at Subway. And
thank you. And then if I can be a resource to help anybody else, absolutely, please let me know. I'm always willing to help. And so definitely want to pay it forward. So if there's anyone in the program that I could be of any assistance, please let me know.